Proof of God Series, DVD 19. Last and Final Pillar, Pillar number 18. The Dead Sea Scrolls and other ancient manuscripts prove the Book of Mormon and other Latter-day Saint scriptures are true.
Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints consider the Book of Abraham to be a volume of Holy Scripture. When it was published on March 1st, 1842, the book was presented to the world as a translation of some ancient records that have fallen into our hands from the catacombs of Egypt, purporting to be the writings of Abraham while he was in Egypt, called the Book of Abraham, written by his own hand upon papyrus. The Book of Abraham has a fascinating and controversial history involving tomb-raiding archaeologists, Egyptian mummies and papyri, and a charismatic young prophet, Joseph Smith, who had a gift for translating ancient languages. Generally speaking, there are three interlocking issues people encounter when they learn about the controversy surrounding the Book of Abraham. First, there's the question of the papyri Joseph Smith acquired and how he translated them. Second, there's the question of Joseph Smith's explanations of three facsimiles published along with the text of the Book of Abraham. And third, there's the question of the historical believability of the text itself. These issues are too complicated to cover in just one video. A good place to start to learn more is a Gospel Topics essay published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints titled Translation and Historicity of the Book of Abraham. This video is just going to focus on the last issue, the historical believability of the text of the Book of Abraham. Is there any evidence that it preserves authentic ancient writings from the biblical prophet and patriarch Abraham? To answer this question, it's important to carefully read the text itself to understand what it does and does not actually say. So let's start at the beginning. The book opens with Abraham residing in a place called Ur of the Chaldees. This Ur was adjacent to an area called the Plain of Olishem. While living there, Abraham was almost sacrificed to some false gods by an idolatrous priest because he refused to worship idols. These gods are given names: Elkanah, Libnah, Mamakra, Korash, and Pharaoh. The priest is said to have been a priest of Pharaoh and is also said to have attempted to sacrifice Abraham after the manner of the Egyptians. In other words, the Book of Abraham claims that there was some kind of Egyptian cultural and religious influence in the area of Ur of the Chaldees, wherever that was, during the lifetime of Abraham, which is believed by scholars to have been around 2000 to 1800 BC. Do we have any evidence for what's depicted in the first chapter of the Book of Abraham? Yes, we do. While most scholars in the past and today believe Abraham's Ur was located at a site in what is today southern Iraq, a good case has been made by some scholars for locating it in what is today southern Turkey or northern Syria. While the exact site of Abraham's Ur is still unknown, a number of plausible candidates have been proposed in the general area near the Turkish-Syrian border. Archaeological discoveries confirm that during Abraham's day there was a discernible measure of Egyptian culture, trade, and possibly even military presence in Syria-Palestine. Furthermore, Egyptologists recognize that the ancient Egyptians during Abraham's day did in fact practice human sacrifice, or more properly, sanctioned killing or ritual violence against enemies of Egypt or rebels against the king. Even the names of gods mentioned in the Book of Abraham appear to have external confirmation. The god Elkanah, for example, is very likely a shortened form of the Canaanite deity name El-Konei Ha'aretz, or God who created the earth. This god was worshipped as El-Kunir-Shah by the ancient Hittites living in Anatolia. There is also evidence that the other gods mentioned in the text, Libnah, Mamakra, Korash, and Pharaoh, were anciently worshipped in this same area. Finally, the name Olishem, mentioned in the Book of Abraham, has been plausibly identified with a location called Ulisum or Ulishum, mentioned in an inscription of an ancient Akkadian king named Naram-Sin. This Ulusum is believed to be located somewhere in southern Turkey not far from the Syrian border, precisely the same location where some scholars believe that Abraham lived. So scholars have been able to piece together a plausible ancient time, location, and cultural setting for the first chapter in the Book of Abraham. Continuing into chapter 2, in a passage that parallels the account found in Genesis 12:11 through 12, the text says that God instructed Abraham to refer to his wife Sarai as his sister instead of his wife when he got into Egypt. This, God says, was to save Abraham's life out of concern that the Egyptians would kill Abraham because of Sarai's beauty. This passage has disturbed some readers because it seems to portray God as commanding Abraham to lie. There's a believable ancient context to these verses, however, that provides important insight. Egyptologist John Gee has explained that the phrasing in the text takes advantage of an ambiguity in the Egyptian language. The Egyptian word for wife means only wife, but the Egyptian word for sister means both sister and wife. Thus, the term that Abraham used was not false, but ambiguous. It was also necessary since numerous Egyptian texts discuss how pharaohs could take any woman that they fancied and would put the husband to death if the woman was married. This advice saved Abraham's life. Also in chapter 2 is a depiction of God making a covenant with Abraham. While some details about the Abrahamic covenant can be read in the book of Genesis, it is in the book of Abraham where important additional aspects about this covenant are revealed. As one scholar observed, the covenant in the Book of Abraham has several features that appear in other covenants and treaties of the ancient world. Treaties and covenants in Abraham's day typically have a preamble or title, stipulations, an oath or solemn ceremony, and, more rarely, curses conditional on violation of the covenant. The covenant in the Book of Abraham follows the pattern for Abraham's day. So while the content of the Abrahamic covenant is what's most important for Latter-day Saints today, the form or structure of the covenant as depicted in the Book of Abraham helps ground the text in the ancient world. Chapter 3 says that Abraham possessed an object called the Urim and Thummim, through which he communicated with God and saw the stars and other celestial bodies. He also had a vision of the premortal council in heaven. Abraham 3 is where Latter-day Saints get their concept of Kolob, which is said to be a star or planet nearest to the throne of God. This so-called Abrahamic astronomy can be situated comfortably in the ancient world. For starters, the text appears to be describing a geocentric cosmos, where the Earth is at the center and the sun, moon, and other celestial bodies revolve around it in graded tiers. This Earth-centered model was commonly accepted in Abraham's day, and yet it contrasts the heliocentric model of the solar system known in Joseph Smith's day, which placed the sun in the middle and had the Earth and other celestial bodies rotating around it. In addition, words such as Kolob and Shineha in Abraham 3 have plausible ancient roots. Kolob is given as the name of a great star located near the throne or residence of God. It could reasonably be derived from the Semitic root kalb, meaning heart, center, middle, and may be related to the root kerbu, meaning to be near or close. This explanation is enticing because it works well as a pun. Kolob, a name associated with the center of things or being near unto things, is described as a governing star that is near unto God. The word Shineha, which is said to be the sun in the Book of Abraham, is plausibly attested in Egyptian texts from Abraham's day as the name for the sun's ecliptic, or the path the sun travels through the sky during the day from the vantage point of standing on Earth. Finally, in contrast to typical Jewish and Christian beliefs in Joseph Smith's day, the creation account found in Abraham 4 and 5 describes plural gods instead of a singular god as carrying out the creation of the cosmos. This depiction of a plurality of gods is much more in line with texts from Abraham's day. The account even uses specific language that invokes the presence of the divine council, a concept that is now widely recognized by scholars as being unquestionably ancient. Scholars likewise recognize that the ancient cultures of Egypt, Syria, Canaan, and Mesopotamia did not seem to recognize ideas of creation ex nihilo, but rather envisioned creation as the emergence of an ordered cosmos out of pre-existing chaos, often represented as a primordial cosmic ocean or sometimes as a primeval cosmic combat between gods. The verbs organize and form are used throughout the Book of Abraham's creation account instead of create, clearly indicating some kind of divine activity of fashioning material as opposed to creating all matter ex nihilo, or out of nothing. The points discussed in this video are just a sample of the evidence which supports the Book of Abraham as an ancient text. Viewers wanting to dive deeper into these evidences are encouraged to check out pearlofgreatpricecentral.org, which has short essays and an extensive bibliography devoted to exploring these issues. While there are still plenty of questions about the Book of Abraham that we cannot fully answer at the present, readers can confidently approach the text knowing that a compelling case can and has been made for its historical authenticity.
Your testimony should not be negatively affected by anything anyone has said about the Book of Abraham. So I'm going to give a little rundown of how we got the Book of Abraham, the translation process, and then the evidence for the Book of Abraham. Joseph Smith got his hands on some papyri, and he basically translated the papyri and wrote the Book of Abraham from that translation. The issue is, when people look at the papyri that we have, they find that it does not match what the Book of Abraham says, but for the most part seems to be some sort of Egyptian funerary scroll. And because of that conclusion, you have about two reactions. The one reaction is, oh well, Joe Smith just made a thing up, whatever. Mormonism is false, or the restored gospel of Jesus Christ is false. But you also have more of a nefarious twist to it. So you have some people that say things like the Book of Abraham is proven to be false, it's completely false, that's it, case is closed, the church is not true, the religion is not true. In fact, sometimes people even use language like the case is closed, Book of Abraham, don't look into Mormonism anymore. People have used certain language about the Book of Abraham to promote this idea that it's not worth researching at all. They kind of up this idea of Book of Abraham is false, please don't look into it. Don't look into anything at all. There is no evidence whatsoever, that's it. It's kind of like in a movie when some guy kills someone and he puts the body in a closet, and then the police come to his house and they're like, what's in the closet? And he's like, well, nothing at all. Nothing to look in, I promise. There's no research you need to do. It's like that kind of a thing. But when you look into the Book of Abraham more, you find that there are some things that are worth noting before you can just write it off. And once you find that, you then find that there is evidence for the Book of Abraham. So when we open the scriptures, we see the facsimile of the Book of Abraham. If you were to grab the facsimiles in general, they're probably just about this big altogether. There's not too much we're operating from. And the issue with that is when we look at the accounts of those who saw the original papyri, the scrolls that Joseph Smith had, they always describe it as long scrolls that you could really unravel and that they, went across the floor, just really long scrolls. But what we have today is not that. This isn't just some new theory that Mormon apologists are proposing. As early as 1968, people like Keith Terry were making the case that we do not have all of Joseph Smith's papyri that he translated the Book of Abraham from. We only have a little bit. And so when people say the Book of Abraham is false, look at the papyri, we're saying we don't have all the papyri. We only have a little bit of it. And in fact, in 2000, John Gee made it very clear that we do not have all the scrolls Joseph Smith had. So anytime someone says, oh, papyri doesn't match, we have to call them out on the fact that we don't have all the papyri. I want you to think about if you're in a history class, and we live in a world in which we only have 1/3 of the Constitution preserved. The rest of it we just lost somehow. And some kid is in class and he says, hey, the Constitution is terrible, I really don't like it, it doesn't cover enough. And you try to explain, well, actually, we only have 1/3 of the Constitution, but there was a lot more that was there. And the guy says, nope, I've made up my mind, without the full picture, the Constitution is dumb, also this history class is a cult. That person would be unreasonable on this topic. So just make sure we can understand that. But let's examine the critical revisionist history of this, okay? If it is false and Joseph Smith just made something up, then it should just be nonsense. Or it should just be some general story about Abraham that's just like the Bible. If Joseph Smith just made it up, then the unique claims of the Book of Abraham, and by unique I mean the things in the Book of Abraham that are not found in the Bible, those claims about Abraham, theoretically those claims should just be nonsense. And we should not be able to find any crossover between those claims in the Book of Abraham and any claims in ancient manuscripts or Jewish documents regarding Abraham. But we'll get back to that in a little bit. Let's say that Joseph Smith actually did translate the Book of Abraham, the papyri, and it matched exactly. How on earth would that help our church? How would that make him more credible? It really wouldn't. The Book of Abraham's foundation isn't like the Book of Mormon. An angel didn't bring the Book of Abraham to Joseph Smith, right? He got it from a guy who was traveling in the United States. So if he just got the document and translated it and we said, look at our prophet, they would just go, that doesn't make him a prophet, that just makes him one of the guys who translated a thing. So if the critics got exactly what they wanted from Joseph Smith, and if the papyri matched exactly what the Book of Abraham was, it wouldn't make them say he's a prophet. They wouldn't care. It would just be another thing that got translated. It wouldn't be that cool. But the fact that the unique claims of the Book of Abraham can be verified by other ancient Jewish texts that Joseph Smith did not know about and were not translated into English until far after the Book of Abraham was published, that is what makes it compelling. That's why we know Joseph Smith was a prophet. The fact that it may not match but is still true shows that there was a divine work that went into Joseph Smith's translation process, and that's really cool. When I was in first grade, I did something really weird. This is at College Gardens Elementary in Rockville, Maryland. I wrote a paper about George Washington, and I made everything up. I just made it all up. None of it was true. I just thought it was funny. If I just completely wrote something about George Washington that wasn't even a little bit accurate, I said things like he discovered the Mayflower and punched a dragon. I just made stuff up, right? Well, apparently they didn't fact check it. I went to the front office and I told them about my paper I just decided to write on my own, and they were so proud that one of their students decided to take on history and write about George Washington. And they let me read it on the morning announcements on the intercom. I read to everyone about George Washington's life, and just none of it was true. I just made it all up. And I think I said, yeah, it's also his birthday today. And they're like, wow, it is. No one had fact-checked me at all. I just made it up. And I thought I was the funniest person ever because I did that. I walked back into class and everyone just starts clapping for me, and my teachers are so proud that I did all my research in history to find out about George Washington. Now, if I had just made all that up, but we found out that the things I said in there were actually true, but I had no way of knowing, that would be a mystery. They'd be like, what? How, what? Quakey, you made it up, you're saying? But then it's all true? How would that happen? It would either be, I guess, things that were so general anyone could have gotten them, divine inspiration, or I actually knew those things. So, and with the case of Joseph Smith and the Book of Abraham, the claims in the Book of Abraham are either so general anyone could guess them, it's either of divine inspiration, or he just somehow was also an ancient Jew. Now remember folks, I am not an Egyptologist. I barely know how to choose emojis on my phone. So I'm not going to be making the case here of like, oh, well, this part of the facsimile means this, because I am not qualified to do that. However, I do know how to read, and I do know how to find translations of ancient documents online. So remember, if the Book of Abraham is false, there should not be any crossover between its unique claims that are not found in the Bible and other ancient documents. But there are. In fact, there are so many, I don't think it's possible that I can ever discount the Book of Abraham as being true scripture. In fact, there is so much evidence and crossover, I can't present it all in this video, but I can give a few of them. There is an old Eastern manuscript called the Chronicles of Jeremiel, and it contains a lot of things about Abraham. It's super old and was not translated and published in English until 1899. The Book of Abraham was published in 1835, so Joseph Smith did not have any access to the Chronicles of Jeremiel. So there's one unique claim in the Book of Abraham. It's that Abraham was going to be sacrificed by priests because he wouldn't worship the idols of his father Terah. This is not found in the Bible. We know in the Bible that Abraham was supposed to sacrifice his son Isaac, but there's nothing in the Bible about Abraham himself being sacrificed in an altar for not worshiping the false gods of his father. But that is found in the Book of Abraham. It's another unique claim, and people are going, where is Joseph Smith getting this from? God. Now, the Chronicles of Jeremiel is not supposed to be written by Abraham, but it draws on a lot of the events by Philo. I've talked about him before on this channel. Whereas the Book of Abraham is something translated that's supposed to be exactly from Abraham. Now, in the Book of Abraham, it says by his own hand upon papyrus. So people assume that papyrus is what Joseph Smith had. The Book of Abraham is Abraham literally telling his story. It's not someone else drawing upon someone else, drawing upon someone else, drawing upon someone else, like the Chronicles of Jeremiel is. It's just Abraham's exact words by his own hands upon papyrus. Now, the papyrus Abraham is talking about may not be the papyri we have, but the actual story that was supposed to get to Joseph Smith for us was what was given to Joseph Smith as he was translating from this other papyri. The story itself is by the hand of Abraham, not the paper itself. So yes, Abraham is going to be sacrificed because he will not worship the idols of his fathers. In the Chronicles of Jeremiel, the exact same thing happens. He's going to be put into a furnace. Now, in the Book of Abraham, he's going to be killed on an altar. In the Chronicles of Jeremiel, he's being put into a furnace. There could have been an altar in that furnace, and this ancient furnace being this room where they're just going to set him on fire, right? But what we can take is that he's going to be killed because he won't worship these idols. This is a very specific, unique claim. Abraham himself in the Book of Abraham is saying, I was going to be sacrificed on an altar because of it, and the Chronicles of Jeremiel, they're saying they're going to light him on fire because of it. Abraham's saying sacrifice, Chronicles are saying lit on fire, but the Chronicles are not exactly from Abraham. But that's not only that he's going to be sacrificed for not worshiping these idols, which is already a bullseye, he gets rescued by an angel. He gets rescued at the last minute by an angel. How cool is that? So in the Book of Abraham, an angel comes down and saves him at the last moment from being sacrificed. And in the Chronicles of Jeremiel, an angel as the Lord comes down. In the Chronicles of Jeremiel, not only does an angel come down to save Abraham, it goes up to heaven and you can hear the angels talking. And in fact, you can actually hear God talking or the Lord talking about who's going to go down and rescue Abraham. If you're a lifelong Latter-day Saint who's been in a mission or is married, listen to some of the language in this. Then spake the angels to God saying, O Lord of the universe, let us go and deliver this man from the fiery furnace. At that moment, a dispute arose among the angels, who said, "Let us descend and deliver this man from the furnace." One said, "I shall go down to deliver him." And another said, "I shall go down to deliver him." Michael said, "I shall go down." And Gabriel said, "I shall go down." Then spake God himself to Gabriel and said, "I am one in my world, and so is this man, who was the first to declare the unity of my name in the world. It is therefore meet that I, the one, should go down and rescue him, who is also one in his generation. It is pleasing to me to descend and rescue him from the fiery furnace." At that moment God descended in his glory and in his strength, and delivered him from the furnace of fire. He brought him forth without a blemish. So the Lord comes down and rescues him. But in the book of Abraham, Abraham says an angel came down to rescue him. Was this angel actually the Lord Jehovah? Or was there just a confusion when this is passed down and eventually published in the Chronicles of Jeremiah? We don't know, but the fact was he's going to be sacrificed for not worshiping the idols of his father, and he's rescued by a heavenly being. But whether he was the Lord or not, it doesn't actually matter, because theoretically, if Jehovah came down to save Abraham and give him a message, he actually still fits the definition of an angel, because angel just means messenger, a heavenly messenger. And if Jehovah comes to tell you something, he's acting as an angel. Chapter 35, verse 3 of the Chronicles of Jeremiah says this, "And the Lord said to him, Abram, I am the Lord who brought thee forth from the fire of the Chaldeans." And in the book of Abraham 1:6 it says this, "And his voice was unto me, Abraham, behold, my name is Jehovah, and I have heard thee, and I have come down to deliver thee." But it's not just in the Chronicles of Jeremiah that it says that, it's in another book too. Targum Jonathan Genesis. It's another ancient Eastern book talking about Abraham. In fact, Targum Jonathan Genesis is talking about all of Genesis and gives a little bit more information and some different information that's found in the Bible. And it says this, "And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought thee out of the fiery furnace of Kasdai to give thee this land to inherit." So what we have in the book of Abraham is Abraham about to get sacrificed, an angel comes down to save him, and then the Lord says, "I have rescued you." These are not found in the Bible. These are only found in other ancient works Joseph Smith did not know about, and in the book of Abraham. In Abraham 1:20, we see that the altar or the furnace is actually destroyed after Abraham is delivered from it and after he is saved. This specific situation is found in a lot of manuscripts. I'm going to read one. It's in Pseudo-Philo. "And Abram arose out of the furnace, and the fiery furnace fell down, and Abraham was saved." In Abraham 1:20 it says, "And the Lord broke down the altar of Elkanah and all the gods of the land and utterly destroyed them, and smote the priest that he died." Also, fun fact, the priest who's trying to kill Abraham being smitten, being destroyed, is also found in other ancient manuscripts too. Now, of course, one of the most unique claims of the book of Abraham is the astrology. Kolob and Kokop and Oleia and all that stuff. And how Abraham sees the stars and he sees the firmament, and God essentially lets him look into space and see all these things. It's a really beautiful and amazing part of the book of Abraham. The issue is, it's not really found in the Bible. The only thing found in the Bible is when God tells Abraham that his descendants will be numbered like the stars. But that's not necessarily astrology. I'm going to use the term astrology in this video. I'm not talking about horoscopes or zodiac signs or anything like that. I'm going to go by the Webster's definition of astrology being the divination of the supposed influences of the stars and planets on human affairs and terrestrial events by their positions and aspects. A heavenly study of the stars is the information that Abraham has. This is a very unique part of the book of Abraham, and people think, again, Joseph Smith just made that up. But in other ancient manuscripts, this seems to be a recurring theme of Abraham having information about the stars and how he's exercising that information. So in the book of Abraham, we have God just telling Abraham all about the stars. In the Chronicles of Jeremiah, we have something similar. In the Chronicles of Jeremiah, it says, "And Abram was rich in cattle, silver, gold, and in all the wisdom of Hermetica and astrology, which he had acquired in Egypt from Pharaoh's magicians, so that there was none so wise as he. From Egypt these scientists spread over Greece, and Abraham was able to foretell the future by observance of the stars, and he was very wise in astrology." So the claims here is that he knows astrology, he knows, stuff about the stars and stuff, but that he also picked it up in Egypt by the magicians. In the book of Abraham, he's saved from sacrifice by the Egyptians, and right after, God opens the heavens and shows him the stars. So Abraham gets this information in Egypt or right outside of Egypt by his own admission, but when someone else is telling the story, they're basically saying, yeah, he picked it up in Egypt by the Pharaoh's magicians. But that guy didn't know that it wasn't the Pharaoh's magicians, it was God. But again, we see this crossover of Abraham being given information about the stars. This isn't found in the Bible, but it's found in the book of Abraham and other ancient manuscripts. I'm going to give one more example of a super cool thing. In the book of Abraham, Abraham sees the spirits that existed before this world. He sees the premortal existence, and he sees the divine council. In the book of Abraham, it goes on, and Abraham sees Jesus Christ with God. He sees all the premortal spirits, and he sees how they've chosen sides, the people who are good and the people who are wicked. In the apocalypse of Abraham, he sees the same thing. He sees it divided, people who are good and people who are wicked, some who will come into the world and some who have already come into the world. But he sees the heavens open, and he sees these spirits. This is exactly what happens in the book of Abraham. And by the way, this is not it. This is not all the coincidences of things that line up with the book of Abraham and other scriptures. There's so much more. Ask yourself this question. If Joseph Smith was just making it up, what are the odds he could get this stuff right? What are the odds he would know that Abraham himself was going to be sacrificed? And specifically going to be sacrificed because he would not worship the idols of his father. How would he know that the thing they were going to kill Abraham on was going to be destroyed after Abraham would be rescued by an angel? How would he know that Abraham was taught astrology? Specific, unique astrology. How would Joseph Smith know that God opened the heavens and showed Abraham the spirits? How would Joseph Smith know any of those things? The information was not available to him. Everything that I've quoted to you and showed in this video are things that were translated into English after the book of Abraham was published, or after Joseph Smith died. So you have to ask yourself this question. How could Joseph get it right? Was he a liar, or was he a prophet? It's one of the two. The book of Abraham was translated exactly by the papyri we have. It would not be interesting, would it? It would just mean Joseph translated something. But the fact that it may not match, but is still accurate and authentic to history, shows that there is a translation process going with God and Joseph that has benefited all of us. And I am thankful that we have the words of Abraham so plainly and purely given to us.
So I'm really excited to do this evidences video. It's on the book of Enoch, which is one of the most powerful evidences of the prophet Joseph Smith. The book of Enoch has been recently discovered. It was prized among Christians during Jesus' day, and even some of the early church fathers, but then it was essentially banned and lost over many centuries. We do have excerpts from the book of Enoch in the book of Moses, in Moses chapter 6 and 7 specifically. We'll talk a lot about that here in a minute, but there's some great writings here. Hugh Nibley did on Enoch, the prophet. Jeffrey Bradshaw, David Larson. We've got this massive book here on Enoch, and some others, obviously. But the Interpreter Foundation, they've published several pieces that go deep into comparing Joseph's writings about Enoch with these recent discoveries. So this is really, really exciting to go through that. Now, as far as the actual book of Enoch, in fact, let me help you. So you can buy these now today. If you get them, they'll typically come, for example, you'll get, there's three different Enochs, 1 Enoch, 2 Enoch, 3 Enoch. When they were basically found, their writings differ a bit. And then there's also 2 different versions of what's called the Book of Giants. Now, giants meaning, another way to say this, warriors there. But these, so if you look at this one's maybe easier to see. Enoch, the Ethiopic Book of Enoch. This was the first one to be found. This was found in 1777 by an explorer that was over in Africa and found it, brought copies to Europe. The first translation of that was done by Richard Lawrence in 1821. This is the longest and least like Joseph's book. There's no evidence that Joseph had a copy or any access to this. We'll talk about that a bit, but we're going to actually in this video eliminate it as an option, since it's what all the critics, the only thing they can focus on is, well, he must have had something because of the ties you're going to hear about in a minute. So here's Second Enoch. It's called The Slavonic Secrets of Enoch. This was discovered in the late 1800s. And then the Hebrew Book of Enoch, that's 3 Enoch, also in that same kind of time frame, well after Joseph Smith. And then the Book of Giants, that's the ace. This is unbelievable. There was 2 different ones, the Book of Giants. There's the Manichaean version, which was found in Western China in 1943. But the big one is the Aramaic version. This was the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this was actually found in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls in Cave 4. Unbelievable. And what it did, it kind of shook things up dramatically on the Book of Enoch. There were different themes in there that were Christian in nature that made people think that those influenced the Book of Enoch. What they actually found from the discovery at Qumran was it dated at 500 years earlier, back to maybe 200, 300 BC even. And what it ended up doing was even turning things around, saying actually it affected the New Testament. It was the other way around. In fact, listen to this little quote. It is hard to avoid the evidence that Jesus not only studied the book, but also respected it highly enough to allude to its doctrine and content. Enoch is replete with mentions of the coming kingdom and other holy themes. It was not only Jesus who used phrases or ideas from Enoch. There are over 100 comments in the New Testament which find precedence in the Book of Enoch. And actually they show where some of these things that Jesus said came out of the Book of Enoch that we have now today. We can see that. Didn't know that before. And the Book of Enoch actually is mentioned in Jude, so that was a reference there. But that was the only thing from before. Now we see there's so much more to it. Okay, now Joseph's writings. So he did this as part of the inspired revision to the Bible when he was doing that. This was in December of 1830 when he was doing this work, and this was an expansionary aspect of the Bible in this Enoch spot. There's only 5 verses on Enoch in the Bible, and then look at what we have in the Pearl of Great Price in the Book of Moses. Let me show you some stats on this. So Elder Maxwell. He said here, Joseph Smith's Enoch has 18 times as many column inches about Enoch than we have in the few verses on him in the Bible. Those scriptures not only contain greater quantity than the Bible, but also contain abundant new material about Enoch on which the Bible is silent. And then Richard Bushman computes a similar ratio. He says that it's summed up in 5 verses. Joseph Smith's revision, Enoch's story, extends to 110 verses. So if you measure it by verses, and Joseph and others refer to, this is not the Book of Enoch, but excerpts from the Book of Enoch there. Okay, how remarkable was Joseph Smith's Enoch? So I don't know if you've read this. This has become famous in Saint land, but I just love this. This is one of my favorite books on my bookshelf, The God Who Weeps by Tyrone Fiona Gibbons. How Mormonism makes sense of life. But this is taken from Enoch. So here, both in the expansive nature of its content and the eloquence of its expression, Terrell and Fiona Gibbons consider the LDS account of Enoch as perhaps the most remarkable religious document published in the 19th century. And one little snippet, I just love this, where Enoch's asking, "How is it thou canst weep?" This is one of my favorite sections in all Scripture. He says, the Gibbons say, the answer, it turns out, is that God is not exempt from emotional pain. Exempt, on the contrary, God's pain is as infinite as his love. He weeps because he feels compassion. It's not their wickedness, but their misery, not their disobedience, but their suffering that elicits the God of heaven's tears. It's just absolutely beautiful and radical theology, if you think about it, compared to Christianity. The creeds say God has no body parts or passions, right? So talk about a different view that the Latter-day Saints have because of Enoch, particularly. So very powerful. Okay, now this is super exciting. Take a look at this screen. So this is from Bradshaw and Daly. They just put this on the Interpreter at the end of 2019. So huge news here. They said additional work is underway to provide a systematic and detailed analysis of ancient literary affinities in Moses 6 and 7, including an effort sponsored by Book of Mormon Central in collaboration with the Interpreter Foundation. Whew. When that comes out, I'll make sure I link it to this video once it comes out. But boy, that's one of those we want to put in cement, because that'll be powerful if they go deep and put something together, because I think it's kind of needed to have it maybe in a very good organized fashion out there that's user-friendly. Okay. Could Joseph have borrowed from First Enoch? Now let me just mention here, First Enoch is the least like Joseph's passages in the book of Moses. The one that's the most like it, big time, is from the Dead Sea Scrolls, from Qumran. It's 3 pages long versus 105 chapters. So please keep this in mind. It's funny, the critics almost, it's like missing, and do your own test. If you read it, you'll see there's very little correlation with 1 Enoch, but it's unbelievable what you're about to hear when you look at the Book of Giants that was in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, but I love what Bradshaw said here in this just released piece here about an updated thing about this, always asking this question. Critics pointing it out. Since Joseph Smith was well aware that the biblical book of Jude explicitly quotes 1 Enoch, the most obvious thing he could have done to bolster his case for the authenticity of the book of Moses, if he were a conscious deceiver, would have been to include the relevant verses from Jude within his revelations on Enoch. But this the prophet did not do. The question also requires that we assess the likelihood that Joseph Smith knew about the 1821 publication of 1 Enoch. Salvatore's that was translated by Richard Lawrence. Salvatore Krill's master thesis at Durham University cites Michael Quinn that evidence of the prophet's access to this translation of 1 Enoch has moved beyond probability to fact. He sees no other explanation for the substantial similarities that he finds between the Book of Moses and the pseudepigraphal Enoch literature. However, Cirillo is at odds with other scholars. For example, as a result of his study, Latter-day Saint historian Richard Bushman concluded it is scarcely conceivable that Joseph Smith even knew of Lawrence's Enoch translation. By the way, when they came out, nobody cared. They didn't even Hugh Nibley talks a lot about this. People were yawning. It was just like when it first came out, because Miriam had been banned for a long time, and if you're reading 1 Enoch, it's also got a lot of crazy stuff in it. It's kind of a little much for people, I think, sometimes, and so it was not received well there in the beginning. So it's changed a lot now since the Dead Sea Scrolls thing, but. Okay, because Joseph Smith's access to the 1821 printing is unlikely, some scholars have argued that he may have seen a purported 1828 American edition of the work. However, Yoko Ben Taub, online pseudonym, has shown that the arguments of Michael Quinn and Salvatore Cirillo concerning this 1828 American printing are flawed in at least 2 major respects. One, Cirillo badly misquotes Quinn as stating that the supposed 1828 printing happened in America. Not only does Quinn not say that, the National Union Catalog says explicitly that it was Oxford. Number 2, it is unlikely that there was an 1828 publication of Lawrence's translation of the Book of Enoch at all. An editor must have mistakenly read 1838 as 1828 when the entries were made for publication. Moreover, even if 1 Enoch had been available to the prophet, a study by Latter-day Saint historian Jed Woodworth concludes that the principal themes of Lawrence's 105 translated chapters do not resemble Joseph Smith Enoch in any obvious way. I can tell you that's definitely the case if you read through it. All right, in summary, it would have been virtually impossible for Joseph Smith in 1830 to have been aware of the most important resemblances to ancient literature in his Enoch revelations. Other than the limited and typically loose parallels found in 1 Enoch, which is discussed previously, was unlikely to have been available to Joseph Smith. The text that would have been required for a modern author to derive significant parts of Moses 6 through 7 had neither been discovered by Western scholars nor translated into English. Even if relevant Masonic traditions had been available to Joseph Smith by 1830, they would not have provided the prophet with the suite of specific and sometimes peculiar details that you're going to hear in a second. They're shared by Moses 6-7 and pseudepigrapha like 2 Enoch, 3 Enoch, and especially the Book of Giants. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to exclude everything, so let's get into it now. 1 Enoch's off the table. Let's just take it off. Say, okay. So now you can guarantee nothing existed until way after Joseph's death. That everything you're about to hear. Okay, let's start out with Enoch referred to as a lad. Okay, remember Moses 6:31, Enoch's referred to as a lad here, and I'm but a lad. LDS readers have often puzzled over Enoch's self-description as a lad, though he was 65 at the time. This is the only instance of the term lad in the teachings and revelations of Joseph Smith. The use of this term by Joseph Smith is of special interest considering the prominence of lad as a title for Enoch in 2 Enoch and 3 Enoch. Now look at this. Gary Anderson, a theology professor at the Hebrew Bible at Notre Dame, writes this about the reference to lad in 2 Enoch. The acclamation of Enoch as lad, or the equivalent term youth in other translations, is curious. It certainly recalls the question that began the story. Why are you called lad by those in the heights of heaven? It is worth noting that of all the names given to Enoch, the title lad is singled out as being particularly apt and fitting by the heavenly hosts. He says, in any event, the reason our text applies for this title is deceptively simple and straightforward. quote, "And because I was the youngest among them, and a lad amongst them, with respect to days, months, and years, therefore they called me lad." So even at age 65, I guess he was the youngest, so that's why he was called lad. So anyway, but what a fascinating thing, that correlation there, lad to lad, and the only time in any of Joseph's writings, revelations or teachings. Okay, rivers turned out of their course. This is stunning. Look at Moses 6:34. The rivers shall turn from their course. Enoch's going to have the power to do that. And then it shows in 7:13 that it happened. They were turned out of their course. Now look at this in the book of Enoch. Take thy way to the source of the waters. Turn it from its course. At this command, Tavril, the angel speaking to Enoch, indeed turn the pure water from its course. We find no account of a river's course turned by anyone anywhere in the Bible. That is just stunning, in my opinion. Just awesome. Okay, now let's get into the next batch of slides. Are all coming from the Dead Sea Scrolls, from the discovery in Qumran, 1948. So everything you hear right now, I want you to think 1948 and 1830. Okay, Joseph's here, December 1830. He's putting together the inspired revision of the Bible, and he comes up with Pearl of Great Price today, Book of Moses 6 and 7, with all these 110 verses or whatever of Enoch. And now we have this, and it's 3 pages. You can read it. It's short, 3 pages, because it's fragments. They put it together, but we get these phenomenal things out of it. Okay, so wild man. Okay, so in Moses 6:38, Enoch's referred to as a wild man hath come among us, and they're actually being sarcastic in the way they're saying that. So Genesis 16:12 is the only other place we see wild man used as part of Jacob's prophecy about the fate of Ishmael. So the Book of Giants. So that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's what it's which was considered part of 1 Enoch, but not in the 1 Enoch we have. So it's like this part there that was missing. Book of the Giants, where the wicked leader of the Geborim, which they refer to the giant warriors, boasts that he is called the wild man. Just as in the book of Moses, the same term is used, wild man, sarcastically to describe Enoch. Okay, now this is a stunner. In fact, I'm going to tell you about an interaction that Hugh Nibley had with the translator of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Book of Giants. It's quite stunning. In fact, he says, someday we're going to find out how Joseph did this, because he's stunned. So this guy shows up on the scene. Out of nowhere appears Mahijah in Moses 6:40. You read about this Mahijah, and in Moses 7:2, another derivation, Mahujah. There are interesting similarities, not only in the name, but also in the role of this character in Joseph Smith's Book of Moses, and the role of a character named Mahujah in the Book of Giants. Very, very fascinating. Same name. Let's look at the role. His role, a direct questioner. The only thing that, so this is Hugh Nibley. He says the only thing that Mahijah in the Book of Moses is remarkable for is his putting of bold, direct questions to Enoch, thus giving the patriarch an opening for calling upon the people to repent, referring them to the Book of Remembrance and telling them of the plan of salvation. And this is exactly the role, and the only role, that the Aramaic Mahujah plays in the story. What the Mahujah most strongly suggests is certainly the all but universal ancient interrogative ma, who or what, so that the names Mahujah and Mahijah both sound to the students of Semitics like questions. The name is found in none of the other Enoch texts, none of them, and neither is the story. It's peculiar to the version Joseph Smith gave us and the oldest known Enoch manuscripts. Okay, now this is interesting. The story of Matthew Black, the translator of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now listen to this. So this Bradshaw and Dolly just put this in here in the interpreter, and I'll link these articles. The only attempt of which we are aware to explain how a manuscript discovered in 1948 could have influenced a work of scripture translated in 1830 comes from remembrances by 2 individuals about the well-known Aramaic scholar Matthew Black, who collaborated with Millick in the first translation of the fragments of the Book of Giants into English in 1976. Black was approached by a doctoral candidate, Thomason, after a guest lecture at Cornell. And he says, I asked Professor Black if he was familiar with Joseph Smith's Enoch text. He said he was not, but was interested. He first asked if it was identical or similar to 1 Enoch. I told him it was not, and then proceeded to recite some of the correlations Dr. Nibley had shown with Millick and Black's own and others, Qumran and Ethiopic Enoch materials. He became quiet. When I got to Mahujah, He raised his hand in a please pause gesture and was silent. Finally, he acknowledged that the place named Mahusha could not have come from one Enoch. He then formulated an hypothesis consistent with his lecture that a member of one of the esoteric groups he had described previously, clandestine groups who had maintained sub-rows of religious tradition based on the writings of Enoch that predated Genesis, must have survived into the 19th century, and hearing of Joseph Smith must have brought the group's Enoch's text to New York from Italy for the prophet to translate and publish. At the end of our conversation, he expressed an interest in seeing more of Hugh's works. So he actually came out and visited Hugh Nibley. And Hugh Nibley records this. His interaction with Matthew Black, the last thing in 1977 visit to BYU. The account included a conversation with Black that apparently occurred near the end of the visit. Nibley asked Black if he had an explanation for the appearance of the name Mahusha in the Book of Moses, and reported his answer as follows: well, someday we will find out the source that Joseph Smith used. And I say, yes, we will. I love that. So, okay. Enoch comes out from a holy place. So Moses 6:41. I came out, a land of righteousness. And if you look here, the Geborim, the Book of Giants, says that his opponents reside in the heavens and live with the holy ones, and in the heavens are seated, and among the holy places they dwell. Okay, now Enoch and the Book of Remembrance. So, Book of Remembrance, Moses 6:46, which the words of God and the actions of the people were recorded. The Book of Giants, a book in the form of two stone tablets, is given by Enoch to Mahusha to stand as a witness of their fallen state and betrayal of their ancient covenants. Okay, Enoch proclaims that the children are conceived in sin. So among the declarations Joseph Smith Enoch makes to his hearers from the Book of Remembrance of their children are conceived in sin, Moses 6:55. This has nothing to do with the concept of original sin, but rather is the result of their moral transgressions. As Nibley expresses, the wicked people of Enoch's day did indeed conceive their children in sin, since they were illegitimate offspring of a total amoral society. Look at the Book of Giants. Know that not your deeds and those of your wives, they are their sons, and the wives of their sons for your prostitution in the land. All those dots mean that because of the fragments, your activity, your wife, your children through your fornication. You can see there's definitely a bunch of stuff of immorality that's happening there. So, okay, now also ending on a note of hope. This is different than First Enoch, which is actually a focus on maximum punishment, and this kind of approach this is more of maximum mercy. The Lord keeps sending chances for repentance in a sense. Moses 6:52, if thou wilt turn to God and hearken unto my voice and believe and repent. Book of Giants, unfasten your chains of sin and pray. Oh, look at this one, the roar of wild beasts. This is interesting. Okay, of special note is a puzzling phrase in Martinez's translation of the Book of Giants that immediately follows the description of this battle. The roar of the wild beasts has come. The Book of Moses account has a similar phrase following the battle description, recording that the roar of the lions was heard out of the wilderness. That's Moses 7:13. Very interesting, the exact same word, roar. Okay, a prison prediction. So, I will shut them up. A prison have I prepared for them. And then the Book of Giants, that's in Moses 7:38. The Book of Giants, he imprisoned us and has power over us. Okay, summary note of the parallel. So think about all the stuff we just talked about. Bradshaw and Larson say, note that the parallels with the Book of the Giants we have cited are not drawn at will from a large corpus of Enoch manuscripts, but rather are concentrated in a scant 3 pages of Qumran fragments. These resemblances range from general themes in the storyline, secret works, murders, visions, earthly and heavenly books of remembrance that evoke fear and trembling, moral corruption, hope held out for repentance, and the eventual defeat of Enoch's adversaries in battle, ending with their utter destruction and imprisonment, to specific occurrences of rare expressions in corresponding context, the reference to the wild man, the name and parallel role of Mahusha, and the roar of the wild beast. It would be thought remarkable if any 19th century document were to exhibit a similar density of close resemblances with this small collection of ancient fragments, but to find such similarities in appropriate context relating in each case to the story of Enoch is astonishing. Love that. So now we're going to talk about Enoch and the temple. Now we're outside of the Dead Sea Scrolls now into the other ones again. So in the 3 Enoch is the great initiator who becomes the great initiator. The Hebrew book of Enoch, that's 3 Enoch, bore the title of Hekalot, referring to the various chambers or stages of initiation in the temple. Now look at this. I love this quote from Brigham Young. I will not say, but what Enoch had temples and officiated therein, but we have no account of it. And then Love Nibley, he says, today we do have such accounts. It's a classic. Okay, enthronement of Enoch. Moses 7:59, thou hast given unto me a right to thy throne. Now look at 3 Enoch. He made for me a throne like the throne of glory and set me down upon it. Dead hit. By the way, when I say 1 Enoch, 2 Enoch, 3 Enoch, that's actually how they refer to it instead of 1st Enoch, 3rd Enoch, that kind of thing. Just be aware. That's kind of how they're noted as. Okay, now, this is fascinating. This just came out the end of 2019 in this Interpreter article, Bradshaw. There's a bunch of newly available Enoch sources, and they put together about a dozen ones. I'll just briefly show you what they are. But look at this. It says in 2018, John C. Reeves and Annette Yoshiko Reed published the first volume of their book series entitled Enoch from Antiquity to the Middle Ages. This volume makes available in English many little-known texts about Enoch from Jewish, Christian, and Islamic sources. The following section summarizes preliminary research comparing passages in Moses 6 through 7 to newly available sources in the volume by Reeves and Reed, including the notable mention of a character that seems to corroborate the prominent role of Mahaiwe, that's the English of Mahajah, in the Aramaic Book of Giants, and Mahajah in Moses 6:7. Like the ancient Enoch sources we have discussed earlier, none of these newly available sources would have been accessible when Joseph Smith translated the Book of Moses. Most of the Enoch manuscripts we highlight below are relatively late, and in some instances may have been preserved largely through oral rather than written traditions. That being the case, one might legitimately question whether such texts could preserve early Enoch traditions with any degree of accuracy. Therefore, discussing these new findings, we summarize the reasons why Enoch's sources of relatively late provenance might still continue unique information that stretches back deeper into antiquity. And they actually put a lot of good information on that in the paper. So again, I'll link to that. Okay, so let's go through. I'm going to go through these really quickly and briefly. There's about a dozen of them, but I'll just keep them short. So the way I've set these up is in a column fashion, next to each other, so you can see them quickly. Okay, let's talk first here. Adam to prophesy concerning all the families of the earth. Then on the right, Adam, God showed him each generation. And then Enoch learned to see divine visions in his normal bodily state. Enoch is reported to have beheld things which were not visible to the natural eye. Okay, the next one. Satan came among them. And then, look on the right, devil appeared to the people in the form of a man. Okay, Satan says, I am also a son of God. On the right, Satan makes a similar claim. I am a servant from the servants of God. I worship him like you. And on the left, the bottom there, Moses 1:12, Moses, son of man, worship me. This is Satan saying this. And then look on the right. Satan presented himself as God and called for the worship of Enoch's sons. That same thing. Okay, Jared taught Enoch in all the ways of God. On the right, Jared taught Enoch the knowledge which he had received and handed over to him the book of secrets. Okay, all the people hate me, for I am slow of speech. Wherefore am I thy servant? Enoch was soft-spoken and gentle in his manner of speaking. Other accounts portray deliberate in his speech and often silent. Okay, on the left, they taste the bitter that they may know the price of the good. On the right, Enoch's request to taste death for a moment during the day and explaining that if he could experience the pain of death and its sorrow, he would be more prepared and more attentive in his worship. Okay, Enoch succeeded in making his people of one heart and one mind. On the right, Enoch united the nations under the worship of God. Enoch built a city that was called the City of Holiness, even Zion. On the right, several ancient texts celebrate Enoch as a builder of temples and cities. On the left, seed of Cain had not a place among them. On the right, warned them not to associate with the descendants of Cain. This next one, this one's pretty crazy. Satan had a great chain, and he looked up and laughed. So chain and laughter. And Enoch had bitterness of soul and refused to be comforted. Look on the right. Enoch was given a tour of hell. A Satan figure saw Enoch. It is reported that his face broke into a grin. Moreover, chains were among the horrors of hell that Enoch witnessed. And then he could not sleep or enjoy the taste of food out of the fear of the punishment of God Most High, which his own eyes had witnessed. Okay, Enoch refused to be comforted until he is persuaded by the Lord's oath to him. Enoch refuses to come out of paradise until he is persuaded by the Lord's oath to him. Almost the exact same. Okay, whoso climbeth up by me shall never fall. On the right, gatekeeper of paradise told Enoch that a branch of the tuba tree would hang down toward him and that he should cling to it and it will bring him into paradise. And Lehi's dream tree of life has similar imagery. On the right, some of the imagery in this story, particularly the need to climb up a branch to enter into paradise, can be meaningfully compared to the narrative of Zosimus and Lehi's dream of the Tree of Life. Okay, so that's some pretty fun. A dozen new ones. Hopefully those will be in the ones from the Interpreter and Book of Mormon Central putting together. It's going to be great. So I hope you realize how powerful this is as a witness of the prophet Joseph Smith.
Hey, we made a set. This might be one of the most requested videos. This might be probably the most requested one. And here's the clickbait. Undeniable evidences of the Book of Mormon! Or I could do like, Mormon destroys non-Mormons with facts and logic. You know, like one of those things. I won't do. If you heard a laugh, that's because my friend just laughed off camera. This episode's actually incredibly important because it's about the truthfulness and validity of the Book of Mormon. A lot of people make a lot of claims. They say the Book of Mormon is completely untrue, there's no archaeological information to back it up, and there's no linguistic evidence to back it up at all. It's all nonsense, it's all fake, it's all a figment of Joseph Smith's imagination. So, if you're watching this video and you're an atheist, I want you to examine the things I'm going to bring forward, and I want you to try to think of how they could have come to pass if the Book of Mormon is false and if it did not come by revelation. And if you're an evangelical watching it and you think the doctrine of the Book of Mormon or the restored gospel contradicts true theology and true Christianity, then think about this. If the Book of Mormon has things in it that are evidences of its truth, either your presupposition about the Book of Mormon and the restored gospel is false, or traditional Christianity is true and the restored gospel are true, and God's just going to let you pick which one. Now, that doesn't make any sense. So obviously it means the presupposition you have about Mormonism or the restored gospel is what is faulty. There are a lot of people who have very honest, good intentions about finding truth and finding the truth of Jesus Christ. So that's what's really important. That's what this video is ultimately all about. It's also important to know that I cannot make you believe that the Book of Mormon is true, right? And one last thing before I dive right into this evidence, here's something you should know. People oftentimes will make a comment and they'll say something like, why do I need the Book of Mormon if I already have the Bible? That's a thing people say. That's kind of a silly concept and a silly way to look at it. Why would you need the Book of Mormon if you have the Bible? Well, imagine you were an ancient Jewish person, okay? You knew the law, you knew the religion, the rabbis taught you well, you knew your faith. And this Jesus of Nazareth guy comes along and saying that he's the way, the truth, and the life. Okay, that's what he's saying. And he's saying all this stuff that might be new or even contradictory to what you were taught. Are you going to throw it away? Are you going to be like, actually, none of that's true. Jesus is getting this information we don't need. Hopefully you wouldn't say that. Hopefully you wouldn't cast out what God has revealed further because you already like what you had before. You know when you were in grade school and you did your homework, but you didn't really want to do any more, and the kid in the back of the class was like, actually, is there anything else that needs to be done? You know that guy? Don't be mad at that guy when it comes to religion. Don't be mad at that guy when it comes to eternal truth. If God has revealed more, you should want that. You shouldn't have this like, oh gosh, there's more for me. You should not have the attitude. In fact, you should have an attitude of, I'm so happy. It's not, there shouldn't be more. It's, yay. One of the biggest criticisms against the Book of Mormon is the fact that the Book of Mormon quotes the Bible. Now, that is not an actual issue because you find that Old Testament prophets quote other Old Testament prophets and New Testament apostles quote Old Testament prophets. And because the Book of Mormon is true, Book of Mormon prophets quote biblical prophets. And in the Book of Mormon, Nephi is actually relaying to his people the words of Isaiah. Great are the words of Isaiah, Nephi says, right? Nephi says that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that. So Nephi says, great are the words of Isaiah. Nephi lives not too far off from the time of Isaiah, and he has the words of Isaiah he's relaying to his people in the American continent. And there are parts of Nephi's sermons attributed to Isaiah that are a little bit different than occur in the Bible. So when you read the Bible, you see what Isaiah is saying, but Nephi says something a little bit different. What does he say, you ask? Well, I'm going to tell you. Here's some examples. If you go to Isaiah 2, 15 through 16, it says this. And upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all pleasant pictures. I mean, this is just a part of a prophecy that Isaiah sees, right? It's a part of a prophecy he sees. But guess what happens when you compare that to an ancient document called the Septuagint? The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and it has the words of Isaiah, or Isaiah. And it says something quite similar. It says this, and upon every high tower, and upon every high wall, and upon every ship of the sea, and upon every display of fine ships. So it's about the same thing, but it doesn't have the ships of Tarshish in it. So you have the Septuagint, which says one thing, and the Bible, which says something very, very similar, right? Theoretically, if Nephi exists and he has the words of Isaiah, guess what? He should have, I guess, a more perfect or pure record of what Isaiah is saying. If we're saying the Book of Mormon is more correct than the Bible, and yes, that's a big claim, but that's what we're saying. And Nephi existed, then theoretically he should have a very, very great record of what Isaiah is saying. Now here's something to know. Everyone agrees that Joseph Smith did not have access to the Septuagint. The Septuagint was not widely available in Joseph Smith's day. Joseph Smith could not read Greek or Hebrew when he first translated the Book of Mormon. So any similarities to the Septuagint can't be traced back to any copy he had. In fact, whether you're a member of the church, or you're an ex-member of the church, or you've never been a member of the church, everyone who looks into this seems to agree that Joseph Smith did not have a Septuagint. So the question is, who does Nephi decide is true? The Bible Isaiah or the Septuagint Isaiah? The Book of Mormon says this, "And upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall, and upon all the ships of the sea, and upon all the ships of Tarshish." So what Nephi does is he takes the Septuagint, and he takes the Bible, and he puts it together. Or rather, Nephi had that pure record, and the Bible and the Septuagint both have parts of it, but he puts it together. Now you might be saying, Kwaku, that's not impressive enough. Okay, that's a okay coincidence, but maybe Joseph just had a Septuagint. Maybe he just had one. And maybe he could read Greek, and he just read Greek before anyone knew he could, and he just lied about it his entire life. Well, okay, you can think that, but here's something really, really cool.
I don't care that you broke your elbow.
In 1947, something was uncovered called the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a wonderful way to verify that the Bible is accurate, hasn't been just totally corrupted and changed. The Dead Sea Scrolls are essentially biblical scrolls that verify what a lot of the Bible is saying down to the T. When you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are things in it that are a little bit different than the Bible, just down to a couple words. So we go and we look at these Isaiah scrolls in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Look, who is Nephi quoting? Isaiah 48:11. So whatever, for how should my name be polluted? Just a part of the verse, so it's not that big of a deal, right? But he's saying, for how should my name be polluted? How can my name be polluted? But the Isaiah scroll says this, for I will not suffer my name to be polluted. It's just about the same thing, but one says, how would my name be polluted? But then the Isaiah scroll says, I will not allow my name to be polluted. That's essentially what it's saying. So it's a little bit of a difference. So what does the Book of Mormon say? Theoretically, if Joseph Smith just made up the Book of Mormon, it would just be quoting the Bible, right? It would just say, for how should my name be polluted? But Nephi records Isaiah as saying, for I will not suffer my name to be polluted. Exactly what it says in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were not discovered until 100 years after the death of Joseph Smith. Pretty cool, right? Is that pretty cool?
I'd say so.
That's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Now you might be saying, that's just one coincidence, Kwaku. That's just one. Just one, okay? Just one. Well, it's not just one coincidence. Here's something else that's really, really cool. You know how Nephi earlier combined the Bible and the Septuagint together? Well, he does the same thing with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Bible again. Isaiah 52 says, their fish stinketh because there is no water. But the Dead Sea Scrolls say, their fish dry up because there is no water. But Nephi quotes both saying, their fish to stink because the waters are dried up. See how he's quoting Isaiah more purely in a sense? But the Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls have just about the same gist, just a little bit different. Here are some other examples of Nephi quoting the Dead Sea Scrolls exactly, where the Bible goes a little bit off.
Andrew, you are not the Father.
Now I know what you're thinking. That's just luck. It's just luck, okay? Joseph Smith was not a prophet, but he was a time traveler. Joseph Smith was a time traveler, okay? He was not a prophet, he was not inspired of God, but he kind of got some stuff. In fact, Joseph Smith didn't uncover the plates, he uncovered a time box. And he got into the time box and went to 1947 in the Dead Sea, got some scrolls, copied them down word for word, put in the Book of Mormon, came back, also went and discovered the Civil War. Got the Civil War stuff, came back, and then wrote it all down. That's how you know, right? Well, of course not! One of the coolest flippin' things about the Book of Mormon is the fact that we often say things like, we don't have any people verified from them. We might have a better record of the people in the Book of Mormon, like Moroni, and Alma, and Paharan, Kishkaman, Korihor. There's a lot of people in the Book of Mormon we could have better records of, but we don't. We've only uncovered about 1 to 5% of ancient America. We don't have an amazing amount of archaeology. In fact, we don't have the same level of archaeological discoveries as we have of ancient Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. We try to pretend like it's all the same level, but the reality is we've barely discovered anything about ancient America. So you cannot hold the Book of Mormon up to the same standard as you would the Bible. You just can't do it. Oh yeah, genocide. We committed genocide among indigenous people and destroyed so much. That's just what happened. Like, if you want to say, oh, we should just have the same thing, well, guess what? A lot of Native American tribes can't trace back a lot of their history because of murder. But even with that kind of unfair standard we have to work with, God is good, and He has shown something absolutely amazing. He has shown that we got some people. Look at this graph! In the Book of Mormon, Jacob chapter 5, he's talking about the allegory of the olive tree. This is maybe the most boring part of the Book of Mormon, according to a lot of members, because they're just like, oh gosh, that's, well, so, it's just boring. I want more fun stuff. It's actually amazing, Jacob chapter 5. And everything he's saying, he's attributing to a prophet named Zenos. He's kind of channeling Zenos. And Zenos is a prophet from the Middle East, right? He's someone that Jacob has knowledge of when he was in the Middle East. By the way, Jacob is the brother of Nephi, the guy we were just talking about. So the question is there any evidence of Zenos existing outside of the Book of Mormon? Yes. If you look up biblical antiquities by Philo, you'll find that there's a number of similarities between a Zenos, a Zenic, or a Zenos, and Zenos in the Book of Mormon. The similarities are incredibly strong, and there's not really a way you can explain them away with coincidence, especially not in light of how the Book of Mormon is quoting the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls. So Zenos from the Book of Mormon is verified. One of the biggest claims against the Book of Mormon is the uniqueness of what it talks about. When the Book of Mormon was translated, it was brought up in a culture that demonized Native Americans. It said they were stupid, that they were not innovative, that they had nothing. They were just a dumb group of people. And in fact, many YouTubers have talked about how there's no archaeological evidence of the Book of Mormon, channel this exact kind of thinking. People like It's Me Jesse and Mr. Atheist, who is kind of my friend, Self on the Shelf, a number of these people who are critical of the church don't realize that they're actually channeling this 19th century bigotry against Native Americans, that they were not developed at all. But the reality is they just were. And we didn't know about it until last year. Non-Latter-day Saint archaeologists at National Geographic discovered something absolutely breathtaking, mind-blowing. People always say, do not quote LDS sources. I want non-LDS people that can verify some of these claims of the Book of Mormon. Well, there just are. National Geographic published this amazing study about what's called LiDAR technology. It stands for light detection and ranging or something like that. And they can essentially shoot lasers into the ground and find out about the structures that existed. Because it's like scanning the structures underground, a number of things. They did an excavation and just a bunch of really cool archaeology mumbo-jumbo that I do not understand. In the Maya civilization, they found 60,000 previous unknown structures. 60,000. And they also found that the population in the Maya lowland ranged from about 15 to 20 million people. Just one coincidence. Just one coincidence, Kwaku. So, the Book of Mormon talks about how there's these millions of people living there and they had these big structures and big cities. And people said for a long time, no, not true. They did not have these large structures. Only in 2018 did we discover that they did. The more time goes forward and the more evidence comes out and the more we have a better understanding of ancient history, we're finding that the Book of Mormon is true. That the evidences of the Book of Mormon cannot be explained away. But I want to leave you guys with one more. It's a very classic example, but I think it holds a lot of weight. And it goes back to the old world. A little place called Nahom. Yes, discovered by non-Latter-day Saint archaeologists. They're like German or something, you know? Yeah, they're just like German people. So, what happened is, in the Book of Mormon, Lehi's tribe, when they're fleeing Jerusalem, they get to places and they start naming these places. But they get to a place which was called Nahom. So it suggests that it was already called Nahom. And what's really, really cool about this is that we have discovered it. Nahom is a burial site. And what happens is someone named Ishmael dies at Nahom and he's buried. Ishmael had daughters as well. And the Hebrew word for mourn is Niham. And as we all know, Hebrew likes to use as we all know, like people watching this know about Hebrew puns. Like, oh yeah, they ancient Hebrews love puns in their writing. Like that's a thing people know. The Old Testament utilizes a ton of puns, and the Hebrew word for mourn is nicham, and Nahum is a lot like nicham. So the gist is the daughters of Ishmael did nicham at nicham, right? That's the thing. Well, like I said, Nahum was discovered in the 1990s by non-Latter-day Saint German archaeologists. What happens is it's a burial site, and they found these altars with NHM written on them. And now there's no vowels in Hebrew, so it could be Nehum, it could be Nahum, it could be a number of things. But Nahum totally works within the number of things it could be. It's also a burial site, and it seems to match the way the Book of Mormon directs the geography, which is really, really interesting. When you further follow the geography of the Book of Mormon, you get to a place called Bountiful, which, for the most part, we're pretty sure we found. You get to the Dhofar region of Oman on the coast there, and the land Bountiful is incredibly similar to it, and it matches up from the proximity of Nahum that the Book of Mormon suggests. Do we have a place located from the Book of Mormon? Absolutely. Nahum and Bountiful. Do we have linguistic evidence of the Book of Mormon from the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls? Absolutely. Does modern archaeology seem to verify what the Book of Mormon is saying? Absolutely. So if people want to say the Book of Mormon isn't true, these evidences cannot be explained away, but you can just ignore them if you want. But the really cool thing about God and salvation and eternity is that when you don't ignore them, they impact you quite a bit. I have a great love for the Holy Bible, and because of the Bible, I believe in the Book of Mormon. And because of the Book of Mormon, I have a firmer testimony of the Bible's validity. And I have a firmer testimony.
Many early critics of the Book of Mormon believed it lacked any literary merit whatsoever. For instance, one man claimed that Joseph Smith was a blockhead, and that the Book of Mormon was the most gross, the most ridiculous, the most imbecile, the most contemptible concern to be palmed off upon a society as a revelation. Yet over time, even some of the Book of Mormon's most skeptical critics have felt compelled to change their tune. For instance, Joseph's famous biographer Fawn Brodie saw him as a myth-maker of prodigious talent, and Harold Bloom, a Yale-trained literary scholar, considered Joseph Smith to be a religious genius. This dramatic shift may lead some to wonder, how did Joseph the blockhead suddenly transform into Joseph the genius in the eyes of his critics? In truth, this change had little to do with Joseph himself, and much more to do with a 588-page book that he dictated to his scribes in less than 3 months. As people began to analyze the text more carefully, it became clear that it was far more complex and sophisticated than most had ever imagined. What makes the Book of Mormon's sophistication so remarkable is that it can be demonstrated on so many different levels. The text has over 200 named characters, over 150 named locations, multiple migrations, distinct cultures, 3 calendar systems, a system of weights and measures, complex source texts, genealogies, lineage histories, political histories, authentic legal cases, realistic battles, multiple literary genres, embedded flashbacks, brilliant doctrinal discourses, numerous fulfilled prophecies, and well over 1,000 proposed intertextual relationships and Hebrew literary elements. Amazingly, these features are all intricately woven together into a coherent narrative which is essentially free from error. For instance, the Book of Mormon has over 600 passages of geographic relevance scattered throughout its text, and yet virtually every city, land, body of water, hill, or region maintains a consistent spatial relationship with other geographic features. Another example of consistency comes from the lengthy genealogical record found in the Book of Ether. The first chapter introduces a list of 30 different kings beginning with Ether and going back to Jared. This list then serves as a framework for the rest of the book, which precisely chronicles the reigns of its kings, except in reverse order. Trying to keep track of the various sets of plates through their transmission through prophetic caretakers and how they are all tied together can be a formidable task. Yet careful analysis has shown that the source texts of the Book of Mormon have been masterfully abridged into a coherent and unified record. In the Book of Helaman, Samuel the Lamanite prophesied of the coming of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Father of heaven and of earth, the creator of all things from the beginning. This 21-word name title happens to be a verbatim quote from King Benjamin's speech, given nearly 250 pages earlier. thus offering a remarkable example of the Book of Mormon's intertextual relationships. Chapters 17 through 27 in the Book of Alma actually contain a flashback within a flashback, allowing readers to view the destruction of Ammonihah from two different perspectives. Yet these separate narrative threads are expertly woven together and seamlessly converge back into the original storyline. In Alma 11, we find a developed system of weights and measures. Not only does it have parallels to ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian systems, but its units of exchange are surprisingly practical. The Book of Mormon contains a number of uniquely developed doctrines, such as the Plane of Salvation, despite the fact that each prophet adapted these core doctrines to his people's various circumstances. It is clear that they shared a very nuanced and consistent set of related theological ideas. Perhaps most impressive of all are the Book of Mormon's variety and quantity of Hebraisms, or features typical of the ancient Hebrew literary tradition and culture. These Hebraisms are consistent with the text's claimed Israelite background, and many of them could be quite sophisticated. For instance, the entire chapter of Alma 36 is a unified chiasm, which introduces 17 key concepts and then repeats them in reverse order. Another parallel structure called gradation repeats each successive concept to create a unity of ideas and build up to a climactic conclusion. At least 50 types of poetic, grammatical, or literary Hebraisms have been identified in the Book of Mormon. Many of them show up in the dozens, and some of them, like chiasmus, show up in the hundreds. This brief sampling can hardly convey the full depth and breadth of the Book of Mormon's impressive complexity, but it's enough to demonstrate that the book is anything but ridiculous, as many early critics believed. Some have even compared the Book of Mormon with its immersive world and characters to popular fantasy novels such as J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Yet, to put things in perspective, Tolkien was an English professor who spent decades developing and revising the world of Middle-earth and the characters who inhabited it. In contrast, Joseph Smith was an uneducated farmer who dictated the entire Book of Mormon, in the presence of multiple witnesses, in no more than 74 working days, without any notes or reference materials, without any substantive revisions, and without relying on scribes to help him remember where he had left off after interruptions. Whether a genius or not, it seems highly improbable that anyone, even a trained literary scholar like Tolkien, could have created and then flawlessly juggled so many complex features under these conditions. Yet somehow, the young 23-year-old Joseph Smith accomplished it, without any prior literary experience to speak of. As LDS scholar Daniel Peterson has noted, the intricate structure and detailed complexity of the Book of Mormon seem far better explained as the work of several ancient writers using various written sources over the space of centuries than exploding suddenly from the mind of a barely educated manual laborer on the American frontier. For this reason, the Book of Mormon's complexity, consistency, and sophistication provide excellent evidence that it truly was translated by the gift and power of God, just as Joseph Smith repeatedly testified.
Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the actual production of the Book of Mormon by Joseph Smith. Absolute miracle of miracles, heart of the restoration, the witness of the restoration. This one is addressing Joseph's intellect. And how is this possible? Where do the words come from? Tackling this head on. So I do love this quote from B.H. Roberts. He said, match it, I say, or with hand on lips, remain silent when his, Joseph Smith's, name is spoken. And in a minute I'll talk more about how hard that would be to match it today with many different statistics. So first of all, take a look at this interesting comparison with a few other key books. How large the Book of Mormon is, almost 270,000 words. The New Testament at 184,000. So the Book of Mormon is almost 50% larger than the New Testament. The Quran, the first book in the Harry Potter series, both at 77,000 words, so 3.5 times roughly those books. And Jack Welch did a great job in his book, Opening the Heavens. He has a whole chapter on the timing of the Book of Mormon. And at max, about 85 days for the translation. It could be as low as 57 days with a lot of the calendaring items that he does. But the majority of scholars think 63 to 65 days. Now, in addition to that speed, look at these stunning details of the translation. They're just remarkable. Brian Hales did a great piece that's published in BYU Studies. I'll link to it. But Joseph Smith and his scribes worked with dictations of 20 to 30 words at a time. The scribe immediately read back the text to ensure accuracy. No books, manuscripts, or other documents were consulted during the dictation. And Hales has a documentation on all these, where it all came from. After breaks, he would start where he left off without reading back the previous portion. The vast word strings of the original draft were eventually typeset into approximately 6,852 sentences, averaging 39.3 words each. Joseph afterward did not rearrange the sequence of a single sentence. Think about that. No rewriting or content editing occurring prior to sending the manuscript to the printer. Also, look at number 1 and the second to the bottom. If the average sentence was 39 words, which is about double a typical author, and you're dictating 20 to 30 word blocks, you're doing partial sentences. Really quite amazing, without any documentation that you've got, and you're also doing it in a strange order. If you think about it, the lost manuscript was the Book of Lehi. So when they actually started this, they started at Mosiah, and they did the small plates at the end. So we read First Nephi at the start of our reading of the Book of Mormon. That was the very end of the translation. So think about the intertextuality and trying to keep this all straight. It's just amazing. And multiple scribes. If you remember when Joseph translated the 116 pages, he had Emma, possibly even Reuben Hale slightly, and then Martin Harris, of course, there, and then Oliver at the end. And I love how the Lord also used these people. Some that fell away, never denied how this process happened. I think it's fantastic. Now both Oliver and Martin came back, but I think it stands as a great witness, just like the witnesses video I did. Okay, let's look at some quotes here. Noel Reynolds, all accounts agree that Joseph never paused to review even the previous page or sentence, and he used no notes, books, or other reference material. Dan Vogel, a critic, admitted Smith's method of dictation did not allow for rewriting. It was more or less a stream of conscious composition. Also, look at this. BYU professor Roger Terry's the editorial director of BYU Studies. He said, consider the fact that Joseph dictated an unpunctuated text. Without the guidance of punctuation to separate embedded clauses, this feat would have been mind-boggling. I think there's like 25,000 plus commas added by the typesetter there. So really quite amazing. Now, here's a fascinating thing, and Brian Hill spoke at the Fair Mormon Conference in 2019. He gave this great example. He says, we don't need to scribe today. We can use this. We can actually use the voice-to-text app in our phones. And so here's the math. Here's what it would actually look like. Look on the screen here. The number of words in the Book of Mormon, 269,528. Remember, 20 to 30 words per block. So let's do the middle, 25 words. So that would be dictating a text of 10,781 text messages. But here's the kicker. As you do this, you can, after you voice it into your phone, you can change the spelling or the grammar. But once you hit send, you're done. You cannot change the sequencing of the order, even one time. In almost 11,000 of these blocks, they're all stacked up in order, not a single change. That's how the Book of Mormon happened. Think about that. It just boggles the mind completely. And it also reminds me, think of who Joseph is. He's this young, uneducated farm boy. This is just how the Lord works. Think about David, the boy shepherd that was to face Goliath and then become the king of Israel. Think about Moses. He had this inferiority complex and speech impediment and things. But he was called to lead the children of Israel. It's just like the Lord to do this. Instead of having some scholar, theologian to do this, he goes to this to really just show them the miraculous nature of it. Now, let's look at this. So Tad Callister just put out a book, A Case for the Book of Mormon. This is, should be on the shelf of every Latter-day Saint, I think, is absolutely fantastic work there. But he does this. In the book, he references Hugh Nibley's challenge to students to write a book comparable to the Book of Mormon. And this is the way that he summarizes the challenge.
Write a history of ancient Tibet covering a period from 600 BC to 450 AD. Why ancient Tibet? Because you know no more about Tibet than Joseph Smith or anyone else in the 1820s knew about ancient America. There's to be no research of any kind. It must be 531 pages and more than 300,000 words in length. So he's including the lost 116 pages. Other than some grammatical corrections and a few other minor changes, you must make no modifications in the text. The first edition, as you dictated to your secretary, must stand forever. You must change your style of writing many times to represent various authors. Subsequent archaeological discoveries must support the truth of the objects, events, and names you refer to. You must invent 280 new names of people and places that will stand up under scrutiny through the years as to their proper application and derivation. Thousands of great men, intellectual giants, national and international personalities, and scholars must accept your history and its teachings as true. Tens of thousands of salespersons, i.e. missionaries, must give 18 months or more of their lives, paying their own expenses and bearing witness to the truth of the book. You must finish writing this book in 65 working days, your viewer. It's absolutely stunning. And you think about, too, the vernacular, writing in the King James vernacular of the Bible, this is the language of Scripture of the day there, and then the different voices that mention their style of writing. There's been as many as 29 different voices through these word print studies. It's called stylometry. It is a new emerging science. And actually, it's been somewhat controversial. I am going to link to one page that does this expert, in my opinion, does a tremendous job in going through and analyzing. It's Jonathan Cannon. I'll link to it, and his credentials are in that piece. But he, at the very end of his piece of analyzing the heck out of all these types of studies, he says, one author didn't write the Book of Mormon, two didn't either, and we don't have anything else written by the people who did. For me, this is fact. Explain it how you will. Now, he mentioned missionaries. I want to actually elaborate on that and think about all the different types of things, of sacrifices, tens of millions over the history of the church, essentially. You think about the volunteerism, the study that was just done by the University of Pennsylvania, 9 times the average volunteer, the time spent of Latter-day Saints. Think about tithing. How highly that's observed. It's a biblical principle, but only 4% of Christians pay a full tithe. I did a video on that. Welfare, it's on steroids. The self-reliant services today. Teach a man to fish. It's phenomenal. You look at the behavior of what the saints are doing as a result of this book. It's stunning. Okay, so Tad Collister goes on to say, does anyone honestly expect us to believe that Joseph Smith, an unlearned young man of 23 years of age, searched out and studied all these resources on Native American life, and held the related conversations on this topic, ferreted out the irrelevant, organized the remainder into an intricate story involving hundreds of characters, numerous locations, detailed war strategies, and doctrinal gems, and then dictated it with perfect recollection without any notes whatsoever, no outline, no manuscript, nothing, a fact acknowledged even among Joseph's critics? During the entire translation process, no one remembers Joseph going to libraries, bringing any such books home, or having any conversations concerning this research. Where, we might ask, is the corroborating evidence? It is nowhere to be found. And then he concludes, with all the claims that Joseph Smith or someone else wrote the Book of Mormon, I have never seen anyone match it. Rather than spending an entire lifetime criticizing the Book of Mormon and arguing that Joseph Smith wrote it, why don't the critics just find some brilliant person in his or her 20s who, in 65 working days, can write a comparable work? And of course, in order to be comparable, it must be done without a computer or any research assistance and dictated without any notes in a single draft. In the end, this would be the critics' best evidence of the Book of Mormon can be man-made. As B.H. Roberts challenged, just match it. But in the final analysis, this won't happen. Why? Because the Book of Mormon is matchless. It's a work of God and therefore cannot be duplicated by man. And then he says, these arguments account only for the book's historical content. The real issues still remain. How did Joseph produce a book that radiates with the Spirit, and where did he get such profound doctrine, much of which clarifies or contradicts the Christian beliefs of his time? For example, the Book of Mormon teaches, contrary to most Christian beliefs, that the fall of Adam was a positive step forward. It reveals the covenants made at baptism, which are not addressed in the Bible. In addition, one might ask, where did Joseph get the powerful insight that because of Christ's atonement, he can not only cleanse us, but also perfect us? Where did he get the stunning sermon on faith in Alma 32, or King Benjamin's sermon on the Savior's atonement, perhaps the most remarkable sermon on this subject in all Scripture? Or the allegory of the olive tree with all its complexity and doctrinal richness? When I read this allegory, I have to map it out, follow its intricacies. Are we now supposed to believe that Joseph Smith just dictated these sermons off the top of his head with no notes whatsoever? Boggles the mind. Now,
Brian Hales at the Fair Mormon Conference in 2019, he talked about just opening up Joseph's mind. How could he have done this? And remember, the naturalistic theory of trying to say, if Joseph himself did this without any intervention from God, you have to show an understanding of how he did it, and it has to be repeatable. So that's the approach. So trying to crack it open, he said one thing we can look at is creative writing. We understand that, and then he applied that model, and he spends almost an hour on this doing it, but then applying this to creative dictation, as he called it, essentially from the creative writing model. But it's a few snippets from that, and he published a lot of this in these things that I'll link to. Historically, the composition technique taught in schools worldwide is called creative writing and comprises 3 general steps. Pre-writing, choosing a subject, creating an outline, and performing the required research. Writing, making the initial draft and combining sections. Rewriting, revising, content editing, and all the subsequent drafts. When dictating a book to a scribe, as Joseph did, step 1 is restricted to memory, and step 3 is eliminated. Creative dictation is more difficult than creative writing because, as Louis Brandeis, who served as an associate justice on the Supreme Court, explained, there's no good writing, there's only good rewriting. Popular novelist and essayist Robert Stevens concurred, when I say writing, oh believe me, it is rewriting that I have chiefly in mind. This inherent limitation of creative dictation is probably why none of the authors in the comparison charted below elected to rewrite their books from memory and then send them directly to the printer. Even genius level intellects today pre-write, write, and rewrite their books prior to completion. Okay, now here are some really fascinating insights that Hales shares on this creative dictation. He says, increased reliance on memory. During dictation, anything interjected into the text must be recalled. Eliminates access to external sources, outlines, research materials, notes, quotation, books, and maps. 18th century lexicographer Samuel Johnson explained, the greatest part of a writer's time is spent in reading. In order to write, a man will turn over half a library to make one book. No revising occurs. This intensifies the need to get the dictation right the first time. In Steps to Writing Well, Gene Wyrick explains, all good writers rethink, rearrange, and rewrite large portions of their prose, making important decisions about the best ways to focus, organize, develop, clarify, and emphasize your ideas. Creative dictation is more challenging than creative writing. The associated memory burden and the inability to revise the previously composed text are constraints that may explain why other authors in the past have evidently never chosen creative dictation as a way to compose lengthy volumes. Theory speculates that in the years prior to 1828, Smith was involved with multiple undocumented activities that preloaded his long-term memory with data, memorized parts of the King James Bible and multiple other books from which he could later recall parallel phrases. Visits to bookstores and libraries to view maps and encyclopedias provided information that was mentally stored. This would have also required Joseph to manifest a vigorous short-term memory capable of rapidly transferring information, creating each phrase and paragraph in succession without the need to resequence any sentence in the Book of Mormon. Joseph's midterm memory, responsible for keeping track of more than 425 geographical relationships and over 175 individuals and groups who existed in at least 125 different topographical locations, hundreds of doctrinal discussions. Since Smith did not refer to notes of the previously dictated text, the midterm memory would have been responsible for keeping track of who was talking or journeying, as well as maintaining the progression of religious topics as they unfolded in the text. It's just simply staggering. Okay, some quotes on Joseph's intellect at the time. Here's some of these sayings. So Emma, his wife, he had neither manuscript nor book to read from. If he had anything of the kind, he could not have concealed it from me. That was a reminder. Now, she said, my beliefs of the Book of Mormon is of divine authenticity. I have not the slightest doubt of it. I am satisfied that no man could have dictated the writing of the manuscript unless he was inspired. For when acting as a scribe, your father would dictate to me hour after hour, and returning after meals or after interruptions. He would at once begin where we had left off without either seeing the manuscript or having any portion of it read to him. This was the usual thing for him to do. Now listen to this. It would have been impossible that a learned man could do this. And for one so ignorant and unlearned as he was, it was simply impossible. And then she also said, Joseph Smith, as a young man, could neither write nor dictate a coherent and well-worded letter, let alone dictate a book like the Book of Mormon. You can start to understand Joseph's intellect maybe back then. Lucy, his mother, said Joseph was less inclined to the perusal of books than any of the rest of our children. Interesting. Now listen to what David Whitmer said in an interview with the Chicago Times. They quoted him, Mr. Whitmer emphatically asserts, as did Harrison Cowdery, that while Smith was dictating the translation, he had no manuscripts, notes, or other means of knowledge save the seer stone and the characters as shown on the plates. he, Whitmer, being present and cognizant of how it was done. In translating the characters, Smith, who was illiterate, notice that word illiterate. Now, he wasn't, he could read, but it was a way to say uneducated in the day. And remember, he had essentially a third grade equivalent education today, reading, writing, and basic arithmetic, essentially. But he goes on to say, who was illiterate and but little versed in biblical lore, was oftentimes compelled to spell the words out, not knowing the correct pronunciation. And Mr. Whitmer recalls the fact that at the time, Smith did not even know that Jerusalem was a walled city. Now, for a handful of others, certainly Smith was smart and innovative, but overall recollections, this is Hales, in the historical record are mixed. Pomeroy Tucker also wrote that Smith was uneducated and ignorant, or Samus Turner believed Smith possessed or little of less than ordinary intellect. Now, Emma's dad, Isaac, listen to this. He says, I first became acquainted with Joseph Smith Jr. in November 1825. His appearance at the time was that of a careless young man, not very well educated. Similarly, John Gilbert, who typeset the Book of Mormon in 1830, remembered, we had a great deal of trouble with it, the Book of Mormon manuscript. It was not punctuated at all. They, Joseph and Oliver, did not know anything about punctuation. When asked, was he, Joseph Smith, educated? He responded, oh, not at all then. There is also no evidence that Joseph visited local libraries, and Emma Smith, David Whitmer, and Lucy Mack Smith reported that his knowledge of the Bible was limited. Okay, now Gospel scholar Melvin Thorne said it's too complex to have been written by Joseph in the manner and the amount of time described by witnesses. Indeed, it is too complex to have been written by Joseph in the manner hypothesized by his enemies or critics. Ultimately, it appears to be too complex to have been written by Joseph or any of his contemporaries in the early 19th century under any conceivable set of circumstances other than the one Joseph describes, the translation by miraculous means of an authentically ancient document. And the Pulitzer Prize winning American historian Daniel Walker Howe said this, he's not allowed to say, he said, true or not, the Book of Mormon is a powerful epic written on a grand scale with a host of characters, a narrative of human struggle and conflict, of divine intervention, heroic good and atrocious evil, of prophecy, morality, and law. Its narrative structure is complex. And he says the Book of Mormon should rank among the great achievements of American literature, and think about how it came about through creative dictation in this 2-month period, basically, with no notes. It's just staggering. Now, some final things. This is fascinating. So Brian Hales did this study. He's developed this. So if you go into, and I'll link to it, into the this piece in Interpreter, he has a bunch of different studies on different authors over time, and he showed just to show how the Book of Mormon looks like compared to some of these. So here's one of my favorite ones. He did this, books written in fewer than 9 weeks. So look at this page. Now note, and you might want to just pause it if you want to just digest it, but look at the education. So Joseph, frontier education, look at the rest, basically all college level. Look at the ages. Joseph's 24 compared to all the rest. Look at the words. The word count is stunning of the Book of Mormon, multiples over even the second place one there. And then the highest, or second highest Lexile score, which that is a way to compute maybe the grade level of the reading. This is about an 8th grade level, a score of 1150. There's some other ones, and he puts it in the appendix showing even up to college level some of the scales of the Book of Mormon. But this one on 8th grade, so you can see on a comparison with the rest there. And here's another one he did, comparing young writers, so age 24 and below. Look at this one. Again, look at the schooling. There's maybe only one that might be comparable to Joseph. We don't really know, but she was home tutored. It says here, Mary Shelley, that wrote Frankenstein. But look at also the word count. The second place one is half the size of the Book of Mormon. And then again, look at the Lexile score. The Book of Mormon by far is the highest on there. So again, kind of some fascinating stuff. And then one last one. This is just for fun, just to show how interesting it is comparing to some very famous authors, and how early Joseph was writing compared to, for example, Shakespeare or Tolkien or Rowling there. So interesting. Okay, now I want to finish with Elder Holland's landmark address of the Book of Mormon in the October 2009 General Conference, and then share my testimony about this personally. So he said, for 179 years, this book has been examined and attacked, denied and deconstructed, targeted and torn apart like perhaps no other book in any religious history, and still it stands. In this, I stand with my own great-grandfather, who said simply enough, No wicked man could write such a book as this, and no good man would write it unless it were true and he were commanded of God to do so. I testify that one cannot come to full faith in this latter-day work and thereby find the fullest measure of peace until he or she embraces the divinity of the Book of Mormon and the Lord Jesus Christ of whom it testifies. If anyone is foolish enough or misled enough to reject 531 pages without honestly attempting to account for the origin of those pages, especially without accounting for their powerful witness of Jesus Christ and the profound spiritual impact that witness has had on what is now tens of millions of readers, then such a person, elect or otherwise, has been deceived. And if he or she leaves this church, it must be done by crawling over or under or around the Book of Mormon. I am one of those tens of millions, and I love how in the Doctrine and Covenants it talks about receiving personal revelation in your mind and in your heart. This video is right here in your mind. It makes no other sense logically for me at all. This is one of the one of the greatest miracles ever to have happened on earth, and it's a witness of the restoration. And for me, it gives me such comfort. As I read it, I have the testimony in my heart that I feel the Spirit, that it's true. And so mind and the heart, and it helps me feel this comfort that God does exist. Not only does he exist, he's our Father. That there is a plan, there's a purpose to this life. That Jesus Christ, through him and his atoning sacrifice, we can live again and we can become perfect. That the gospel was restored in its fullness here. The priesthood authority, ordinances, covenants. It's amazing. And we have a prophet today. All of these things. And the witness for me, even believing in the Bible, that's something that's told that this would be a purpose of the Book of Mormon. People in the secular age today are fleeing from trusting in the Bible. This allows you the strength of the Bible and the witness there. So that is my testimony, and I leave it with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.